Also over at BangTheBook.com, we got tons of great stuff going on right now. Situational betting articles, daily picks and previews, daily betting trends articles, our contests where you can sign up for free, win some cash prizes there in those. Our matchup data section, you can see side-by-side statistical comparisons of the two teams in a given matchup. There's trends in there. There's injury news in there as well. Lots of stuff going on in that matchup data section, and lots of stuff going on in general over at BangTheBook.com. We are your one-stop shop for sports betting news and information. Check out our sportsbook reviews as well. See which sportsbook works best for you. Again, we're just over 2 weeks away from the Super Bowl now. Super Bowl props will be coming out probably Thursday and Friday of next week, I would say. So you're going to have some time to bat those around a little bit. Obviously, there'll be a significant number of props once we get to game week, but critically important, very, very important, as we talked about with the College Football National Championship game, to have multiple outs at your disposal so you can shop around for the best prices on those props. And not only that, but if you've got multiple outs at your disposal, we're not just talking about getting a line that's 2 or 3 yards lower than it is somewhere else, or maybe 10 or 15 cents of juice. Sometimes you can find the opportunity to play some middles, play some arbitrage with these props as well. Now, obviously, you can't get as much down on props as you can get down on sides and totals on on regular games and all that. But still, you can find some opportunities to free roll some of these props. We talk about using MVP props or over props for quarterbacks as a hedge on the spread bet that you like. So this is very, very important stuff. And that's something I really want to stress here as I'm going to take over a good portion of this show. We will have Brent from DSI Sportsbook later on the program with this week's version of the Odds Report. But, I wanted to take some time here on today's show to just sort of reaffirm and reestablish everything that we try to do here with Bang the Book Radio. We want to arm you with the information. It's great to listen to these shows that some of our competitors have where they just run down, I like team X, Y, and Z. Go ahead and bet team X, Y, and Z. I don't want to do that. We do talk about the leans that our handicappers have, or sometimes they give out their premium selections on the show. But ultimately, my goal with this show is the same as it has always been. I want to give you the information to make the decision for yourself. If one of our handicapper guests talks about really liking a play, you're not so sure, we try to give you all angles with a play like that, especially when it comes to marquee games like the playoff games, like some of the big college football games we talked about this year, also some of the NBA and college basketball games that we look ahead at. That's what I want. I want our listeners to be able to take care of business on their own. And that's why I form the questions to the guests in the way that I do. When we talk about a conference like we did yesterday with Rolf Michaels, Virginia is a very good team. Duke is a very good team. North Carolina, a team that hasn't lived up to its ceiling yet, but probably will. But, we're not telling you, play Virginia every day. Play North Carolina every day. We're talking about strengths and weaknesses of these teams, how these teams tend to stack up. We'll talk about situational elements with those teams. I want you to be able to make the final decision for yourself based on all of the information that's out in front of you. And I think that's a strength of our show that a lot of other shows out there just cannot replicate. They cannot do what we do here in terms of trying to set up people that want to learn, set them up in a way that allows them to learn, in a way that allows them to get better on their own. And I know I've had a lot of people reach out to me recently and in the past saying, listening to your show, listening to your segments has really helped me become a better handicapper. I'm seeing things better in the marketplace. I'm picking up on those context clues in the lines or applying situational betting spots to my handicapping. I love to hear stuff like that. So if you have any feedback like that, please pass it along. It's stuff that I love to hear, reaffirms my passion for what I'm doing here when I get that type of feedback. So if there's anything that you ever want to reach out about, please make sure that you do. Now, as far as today's show, like I said, we'll have Brent coming up here in a little bit. I figured today is a pretty good time to start looking around at the Major League Baseball futures market on the show. Now, I have written about it over at BangTheBook.com. I've done about a monthly update in terms of the World Series odds, just kind of following along with what has been a very quiet offseason so far. You had the Ohtani signing. You had the Stanton deal. We'll probably see a Christian Yelich deal very, very soon. Marcelo Ozuna was on the move. So we've had some moves here and there. Addison Reed just got signed not too long ago. We're still waiting on guys like Eric Hosmer, like Yu Darvish, like Jake Arrieta. There are still a lot of dominoes to fall here in terms of the Major League Baseball offseason. So, I'm not going to go too in-depth with these World Series things. And, of course, coming up here in about 4 weeks' time or so, we'll get MLB season win totals. I'll start unveiling my season win total preview series. Hopefully by then, we'll know where some of these players have gone, and we'll be able to give some stronger assessments at that point in time, because there's still a lot of players out there that can be very, very helpful to teams. When you talk about a guy like Lorenzo Cain that no one's really talking about out there in the market, that's a guy, he's a 2.5 or 3 win player. And by wins, I mean wins above replacement player. He will help somebody. He is a guy that can put a contender in a much better position. And we just haven't seen him get signed yet. Obviously, J.D. Martinez is out there as well, and the Boston Red Sox seem to have a 5-year, $100 million offer on the table for him. Scott Boras was talking about him being a $200 million free agent prior to this offseason. That's just not going to happen. And there's been a lot of really interesting baseball content written recently. Jeff Passan over at Yahoo did a fantastic piece about some of the things that may be holding up the free agent market right now. Some possible collusion. You've got teams that just aren't really trying to win right now. And that's something I think is very important to point out here as we look ahead to the World Series futures market, is that how many teams actually have a shot to win this thing? Now, I've been a long believer in the fact that you just want to win your division, win that wild card, get into the dance, and see what happens. Then you'll see who your partner is at that point, see if you can take care of business there. But even still, as you're looking around at the current climate of Major League Baseball, outside of the Astros, the Indians, the Yankees, the Red Sox on the fringes there, the Dodgers, the Cubs, and probably the Washington Nationals, who else really has a chance to win this thing? And that's something you have to ascertain here at this time of the year, because you want to try, from a future standpoint, you want to try and get some medium shots. There's really not a ton of value in playing the Dodgers at 6-1 like they are at BetOnline right now. They're 5-1 over at 5 dimes. The Cubs are 9-1 at BetOnline. There may be a little bit of value in that one. Plus 875 at 5 dimes. You've got Houston plus 550 at BetOnline, plus 500 at 5 dimes. There's not a whole lot of value, when it comes to that, because as good as those teams are, and you look at what Houston's put together now, acquiring Garrett Cole to shore up their rotation. You look at the bullpen that the Yankees have, and it's absolutely incredible. Mike Petrello on Twitter has been talking about, just how good this bullpen is, but there's no value in a 5-1 at that point, because baseball is a high variance game. And when you look at what happened last year, the Indians were a big favorite in their first round series against the Yankees, went up 2-0, wind up losing in 5. Yankees make their way to take on the Astros in the AL Championship Series. Astros find a way to survive that, go on and win the World Series over the Dodgers, and that was a very competitive, very exciting series. The Astros and Dodgers were supposed to be there, but it generally doesn't work out that way. And I've mentioned this before. Since we started with the current divisional format and the wild card era, or actually since 2010, I think it was actually that I was looking at, you had basically a 500 split in terms of the team with the better record going into the postseason, winning the series. So when you get to the playoffs, things are a lot different, and you've got these standout teams right now that certainly look like juggernauts. When we get to the playoffs, will they still look the same way? I think that there's a chance that they could this year. I think this is, one of those years, and I think in the current climate of Major League Baseball, it's very, very difficult to be a team that's in the middle. You've got these 6 or 7 teams that really stand out. You've got some teams in the next tier, maybe 12 or 13 teams in the next tier, that if everything goes absolutely perfectly right, if everything works out exactly as planned, they can have some sort of magical, really spectacular year. And then you've got 10 more teams that just aren't trying at all. They're shedding payroll. They're in the midst of a rebuild. You look at the White Sox, the Reds, the Marlins, obviously shedding salary left and right. Now you've got the Pittsburgh Pirates moving around a lot of salary. I think the Pirates were like plus 3,000 or plus 2,500 to win the World Series at the start of the offseason. Now they're plus 8,000. I mean, they're priced the same as the Philadelphia Phillies. So you have a lot of teams in Major League Baseball right now that are just in various states of rebuilding mode. And that's really important for you when you look at the World Series futures market. Take Houston, for example. Houston's plus 550, but Houston plays in a pretty strong American League West. The Angels have made some very good moves this offseason. Seattle still has some players. Texas isn't completely barren. Oakland's not a great team, and they'll probably look to move off some of their pieces and parts as we go along here because they know that they're up against it in the American League West. But taking Houston at plus 550, when they're going to have a dogfight possibly to win this division, it's not really a great play. There's not a whole lot of plus EV, plus expected value upside in that type of play. On the other hand, you look at a team like the Indians here who are plus 750, and full disclosure, as everybody on this show knows, I am a Cleveland Indians fan. But think about it with the Indians. They have one challenger in the American League Central. That's the Minnesota Twins, and I don't know how much of a challenger they are right now. They've made some very good offseason moves, both in the front office and on the field. But can they go out there and top the Indians for this division, either force the Indians into that wild card game where they'd have to burn Corey Kluber, or maybe the Indians even lose that wild card game? I doubt it. The Indians, despite having a very quiet offseason, still third in terms of projected wins based on the Fangraphs depth chart projections. So this is still a very good team, and it's also a team with a very high likelihood of winning the division. And that's the same thing with the Chicago Cubs. To me, I think the Milwaukee Brewers are the biggest test for the Chicago Cubs this year. Maybe St. Louis. I think St. Louis is still a solid team. But if you look out there in the futures market, both of those squads right now, plus 2,000 at BetOnline. The Brewers a little bit lower. They're 40-1 out there at 5 dimes. The Cardinals certainly higher, plus 1,850. So again, make sure you're shopping around for the best prices with any futures market. But the Cubs look like they're in good shape to win the division. Barring a run of injuries or something like that, they should win the division. They should get to the dance with relative ease. So at that point, a 9-1 makes some sense. But you got a spot like Houston, even the Yankees to some extent. Playing in the East, Toronto still has some talent, although it looks like they're a little bit of a long shot to make the playoffs. Boston's still a very good team. That's what you need to consider, is that if you are not the clear-cut favorite in your division, like the Indians, like the Cubs, like the Washington Nationals, you run the risk of playing in that one-game playoff. And I don't care how good you are. I don't care what your bullpen looks like. A one-game playoff for your postseason lives, that's scary for a team. That is absolutely terrifying for a team. And even if the Yankees get into a situation like that, yeah, they're a clear favorite. Yeah, they've got a great bullpen. Yeah, they can be very aggressive with the way that they deploy their relievers. But still, in a one-game sample, anything, absolutely anything, can happen. So think back to last year's wildcard game. Luis Severino did not pitch well in that situation. But fortunately for the Yankees there against the Twins, Irvin Santana didn't pitch well either. So they were able to outslug Minnesota in that game. But just think, we could have had Minnesota in the ALDS against the Indians instead of the Yankees. The Indians probably beat the Twins in a best-of-5 series. Would have been an overwhelming favorite to do so. Do the Indians go and beat the Astros, who wound up winning it all? Obviously we don't know that. But what we do know is that wild card game, that one-game proposition, very, very scary. And that's why that's something you need to keep in mind with a team like the Arizona Diamondbacks, for example, at 25-1, or the Colorado Rockies at 25-1. And I'm pulling those prices from BetOnline. Colorado is actually 40-1 at 5 dimes. So again, cannot stress this enough. Shop around for the best price, because every cent, every dollar matters when you talk about futures. But can Arizona or Colorado beat out the Dodgers for the division? I mean, the Dodgers had that deep playoff run last year, made it to Game 7 of the World Series. Sometimes there's a little bit of a hangover effect with that, and we kind of saw that with the Indians early on last season. But from a depth standpoint, even without Yu Darvish, there's really not anybody that comes close to the Los Angeles Dodgers. So can you afford to take a Diamondbacks team? Can you afford to take a Colorado Rockies team when it looks like, best case scenario, they're in that one-game playoff? That's the real hard part when you talk about playing futures in the MLB betting market. So you want to look for teams where, can Minnesota win the AL Central? Sure, they could. I mean, if Francisco Lindor, tears his ACL and he's out for the year, and I'll knock on wood very, very loudly, so the gambling gods, give me a pass on that one. But if Lindor gets hurt, if Jose Ramirez gets hurt, maybe Corey Kluber and Carlos Carrasco get hurt. Maybe you run into a New York Mets-esque type of scenario there for the Indians. Minnesota is legitimately the only team in the American League Central that can benefit from that. The White Sox are going nowhere. The Royals are in rebuilding mode. The Detroit Tigers may be the worst team in baseball this year, even with some of the pieces they have in their lineup. So that's something you want to consider from a future standpoint. That's why the Twins at 28-1 bet online, and the Twins are actually 35-1 at 5 dimes. That's why they would be something that I would be interested in looking at as one of those mid-range prices. And if you can't find one of those that you like, you've got to play teams like Boston plus 1150, Angels at 21. The Angels are 16-1 now at Bet Online. If you played that one earlier on in the offseason, they were 33-1 at Bet Online. I think they were about 40 or 50-1 at 5 dimes. So those are the situations you want to look for. The divisions where, if something goes really wrong for the top team, they may be a little bit vulnerable. I think Washington in the East is so much better than everybody else that there's probably not anybody that can contend with them, even if they run into some injury problems like they did last year. I don't think the Mets are there, despite some of the signings that they've made and the hire of Mickey Callaway as the new manager. The Phillies are a team that I do think is very interesting. If you really want to take a long shot, there's somebody I would look at. But again, at 80-1, the team that's not going to win the division, it's very tricky to make that type of play. So quite frankly, I know that this kind of waters down my whole conversation and argument here. I think the Major League Baseball futures market is the worst one to bet on, because with the current landscape of the league, with a third of the league's teams not even trying, a third of the league's teams just so far behind the others, and then about 10 teams that you could say have a shot, and probably 6 of them legitimately do, it's very hard to find value out there in the baseball betting market. However, as we start thinking ahead a little bit to when these season win totals come out, take a look at the Indians, for example. Their season win total, I think, is probably going to be somewhere in the 90 to 91 range. That's right where their projection is from Fangraphs, and we'll see what their Zips projection is when that comes out here this week. But they're going to play 19 games each against the White Sox, Royals, and Tigers. Those are not good teams. Those are 3 of the worst teams in the American League. So as you start looking at this thing for the Indians, you have to find reasons not to take the over, because those are 57 games out of their 162-game schedule where they should post a very good record. They should probably go, they should probably win 35 or so of those games, 35-22, something like that. You're already 13 games over 500, and then you figure out what you do in your other 100 games. So those are the things that you want to be focused on and considering when it comes to 2018 in the futures market for Major League Baseball, is that division matters so much because of the imbalanced schedule where you play 76 division games because you play everybody 19 times. That's very important when you talk about the season win total market. That's also important from a World Series standpoint because you have to get in to the playoffs. Once you get into the playoffs, then maybe anything can happen. Certainly in the 5 and 7 game sample sizes, variance can be a real you-know-what. And, obviously I've seen that firsthand a couple of times with the Indians. So these are the things that you want to focus on. Division strength is very, very important. Also keep in mind, the teams that have depth. This will be something I talk about a lot in my season win total articles once we get to those here next month, is that depth is critically important to me. Now you've got the 10-day disabled list. So teams are more willing to put players out there on the disabled list because it used to be 15 days. And when you talk about starting pitchers, that's another turn through the rotation. So starting pitching depth is very important because guys are just going to get hurt. Bullpen depth is critically important. I will have some eye-opening statistics here to talk about very, very soon when it comes to the distribution of innings between starters and relievers. It is going down considerably. And I don't know when that trend will stop, because you have a lot of teams now that pay attention to the third time through the order penalty. Everybody knows that the game is so specialized nowadays. So teams with elite level bullpens are something you definitely want to monitor. That's why I'd have a hard time taking the Red Sox at 10-1 or 12-1, wherever you can find them out there, because they just don't have that bullpen. They don't have a deep group of high upside guys. You've got Craig Kimbrell, and obviously he's awesome. We'll see if Tyler Thornburg's able to come back. But, they just don't have that same level of depth. So you run into a situation here with a team like that where there's just not a ton of value on them at this stage of the game. Maybe you wait and see who they pick up in terms of the trade deadline, if they add some pieces at that point. But in terms of a pre-season position, you've got to look for teams with good depth on the pitching staff, specifically the bullpen, and teams that are in good situations within the division. And for Boston, people forget, they won the division last year. Now, they probably shouldn't have when you look at what they did offensively, but they won the division last year. So this is not some bankrupt team. This is not some team that's terrible just because the Yankees added Giancarlo Stanton and still have Aaron Judge. This is a Red Sox team that played very well during the regular season last year. We'll see if they're able to continue it this year. But I know it's hard to get into the baseball mindset, especially if you live somewhere where it's been cold, and clearly it's been cold throughout most of the country here over the last several weeks. These are the things you want to consider. You never want to be caught off guard because time flies. As I talked about, I think earlier on in the week here, we're already more than halfway through the college basketball regular season pretty much. Or about half, I guess is about the halfway point of the college basketball season. It's flying by. If you're not out there paying attention to the futures market, you've missed some prices that have been out there. And, that's the crazy thing is that this industry just doesn't stop. It's a 365-day-a-year thing. If you really want to take it seriously, if you really want to diversify your handicapping portfolio, playing futures, taking some of these investment-type positions as opposed to just betting game-by-game basis. So many important factors, so many important considerations. And, this is something I talked about with Brad Powers a little bit on Thursday's show and something I talked about with him off the air as well, is that there's so much more value now in playing these season-long bets. Whether you're getting out there in front of the market with some of the games of the year lines, or you're playing win totals, or you're playing futures to win the championship, so much more value in that nowadays, because there's just so much saturation on a game-by-game basis. The lines are so much tighter now. You have so many more considerations. I'm not that old of a guy, but I think back to when I started handicapping, 10, 12 years ago, and, NBA players weren't sitting out games. You weren't looking at teams in look-ahead spots as much, or maybe it was just something that wasn't publicized as much as it is now, but the inconsistency, the volatility of so many of these leagues is just so maddening. That was something that Brad reached out to me about before the show yesterday. I told him I wanted to talk some college basketball, and he was like, well, we could talk about how, 5 top 20 teams went down again on Wednesday night. That's just it. There's call it parity, call it inconsistency, call it, situational spots, whatever you want to call it. It's so hard nowadays to play in these day-by-day markets. There's just so much variance, so many more swings. The swings aren't there when you play futures. If you make smart, sound investments, you set yourself up to be able to hedge some of these opportunities. You set yourself up to get some good prices that are out there as well. Yeah, it's not great to have your money tied up from now until the end of the World Series, which will probably end, October 31st or November 1st or 2nd, whatever it is. I totally get that. If you're an action junkie, if you're somebody that likes to bet on games for some interest and something to do, then yeah, maybe you're not going to play a whole lot of futures because you want your bankroll a little bit more liquid, a little bit more fluid so that you can play with it on a day-by-day basis. But, I honestly think that there's just more value nowadays in being really selective and in selectively picking out futures opportunities. I'm not an action junkie. Early on in my handicapping career, I loved the action. I'd be out there playing those 3-line parlays. I'd be out there spreading my bankroll around, reloading a couple times a month. I don't do that anymore because I don't need to, because, I understand so much more the value of a dollar, for one thing, because I've gotten older, but also because I understand the industry more. And as I continue to evolve, I'm seeing these different opportunities that make a lot more sense to me. I like playing MLB season win totals, even though they're not decided for 7 months, 8 months until after I make the play. But, those are things that I view as investments. And those are things that, I think have a greater opportunity for profit potential just because there's less variance. In a one-game sample size, anything can happen. You could bet on the Braves plus 350 against Clayton Kershaw, and they'll beat the Dodgers. But over the course of 162 games, are the Dodgers going to win more than 93 of them? Probably. So you can make that determination by looking at these futures plays and looking at these opportunities that are out there. And truthfully, like I said, I think that really is the way to go. So I'll be talking a lot about that in the lead up to the Major League Baseball season. Now, I will be doing my daily picks and analysis piece where I kind of break some of these pitchers down and all that. But that's another thing. I mentioned it on yesterday's show, on Thursday's show with Rolf Michaels. One of the things that's been really hard for me to wrap my head around is the streakiness, the short-term, the short-term perspective that you need to have with the NBA and the NHL, and even college basketball to some degree as well. That's not me. That's not the way that my mind operates, especially in the statistical context, because of what I do with my Major League Baseball handicapping. And that was something that got me into trouble last year, is that, I'd be looking at pitchers for signs of regression. They're supposed to come. They should be there, but they may not happen in that one-game sample size. They may happen over 5 or 6 games where the guy pitches okay, gives up 4 runs over 6 innings, or 3 runs over 6 innings. 3 earned runs over 6 innings is a 4.50 ERA. If you have a 4.50 ERA, you're not good. You're not a good pitcher. You're a below average, certainly bottom half of the league, maybe bottom third of the league starting pitcher. Technically speaking, that's not a good start when you're looking from a sabermetric standpoint, for regression. But also, you give up 3 runs, you pretty much kept your team in the game. So that's something I'm going to need to focus on a little bit more. And one of the reasons why I prefer to do this season-long betting is that if I see a pitcher in line for positive regression or in line for negative regression, I have a better chance of capitalizing on that over a long-term sample size than I do, in sample sizes of single games. So I'm really going to emphasize that here this year, both on the shows and in my writing, to really pay close attention to these long-term bets. Like I said, I know it's a hard thing to do because you tie your bankroll up, but I think that really is the way to go because you eliminate some of that variance that's out there from playing those single game sample sizes. So, like I said, I will talk a lot about this here as we go forward, as we go throughout, the rest of the off season here. And the last thing I'll say about this, and we'll get into this week's version of the odds report with Brent, is that for Major League Baseball right now, it is not a great time to get into the market. So I wanted to spend some time talking about it. I wanted to lay the groundwork and the framework for, what I plan to talk about over the next several weeks. But because there are so many guys still available out there, unless you can pinpoint where some of these players will go, it's a very, very challenging time to jump in and take the plunge. Now, I think that, you could maybe find one of those mid-range types of teams that goes out and gets a Lorenzo Cain, that goes out and gets a Yu Darvish, like the Twins, for example. The Twins have Byron Buxton, so they don't need a center fielder. But if they go and get Yu Darvish, all of a sudden this team looks a little bit different. And again, at 35-1, with one competitor within the division, that is something that maybe you can look to exploit, look to take advantage of. So if you want to take some time here over the weekend with just a couple of football games going on, maybe you're not big on college basketball, or you want to wait until the early part of next week, look around at some of these Major League Baseball teams, see who needs to find, some reinforcements, see who could be a player in what is a very, very soft Major League Baseball free agent market. Again, coming up after this year, you've got guys like Bryce Harper and Manny Machado that are going to be out there on the market. Some teams aren't really interested in spending money this offseason because they want to gear up for a run at those types of guys. Other teams know that they can't pay $300 or $400 million for Machado and Harper, so they'll take advantage of this soft market here as we go into the month of February. We've seen a lot more free agents signing later on in the year because they're getting desperate to take jobs. They want to feed their families. They want to know where they're going to be playing this next season, and teams know that. So teams will sit, wait out the market, be very patient, get a lot of these guys at bargain bin deals, and those are things that can have some influence in the futures market. Not a ton, because we're not talking about too many impact guys right now, but they're still going to make teams better. So if you look around and find some of those situations, maybe the Angels decide that they want another piece that's out there in the marketplace. They go out and get it. They become a little bit more legitimate of a challenger to the Houston Astros. Same thing with the Diamondbacks. If the Diamondbacks pick up a missing piece, maybe bolster the depth of the bullpen a little bit, get a back-end starter type, maybe reunite with a Trevor Cahill or something like that, maybe that helps them relative to chasing down the Dodgers. So if you get a chance, take a look around, see what you can find there in the Major League Baseball betting market. Like I said, you don't have to jump at anything right now, I don't think. We saw the earth-shattering Garrett Cole deal. I think we may see Boston wind up with J.D. Martinez, and that is something that would move the market. If they do get J.D. Martinez, they probably go from 11.50 to 10-1, maybe 9.50, something like that at 5 dimes, because they will separate themselves not from the Yankees, but from the rest of the division. And that's also very important to be, one of those teams that should take care of business within the division if Boston gets an offensive piece to help. Because like I said, they won the division last year with a very bad offense. Get some bounce-back years for some guys, add J.D. Martinez, maybe pick up somebody on the cheap for the bullpen here because there are guys out there to get. All of a sudden, things look a little bit different for Boston. So if you start isolating these teams that look like they're going to be aggressive, maybe you get out there in front of the market, try to grab a little bit of line value. But I think in a lot of cases here, you can really sit back and wait on some of these teams just to see what they decide to do here moving forward.